Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Waystation. This is Season 2, and I'm your host, Rebecca Daranellis, nobody in particular, and also just like you. In every episode of the Waystation, we explore first-person stories, each told on a common theme, but from vastly diverse perspectives. We'll introduce you to everyday real people whose lives are seemingly different than yours. Or are they? Perhaps through these stories, you may find that you and me and he and she and they and them are more alike than we're willing to admit. But first, a thank you to our sponsors over at Pioneering Collective. This podcast is powered by Pioneering Collective, an executive thought leadership firm combining personal PR, coaching, and networking to transform hard-earned wisdom into heavyweight impact. Learn more at pioneeringcollective.com. Truth is, for all accounts and purposes, subjective. Hear me out. Truths can be facts, yes. And facts by nature are not subjective, of course, but one's own truth, their perceptions of reality, is completely subjective. And yet we are born into a story, I call it, put into place by our families, by society, by our teachers, narratives that pose as absolute truth because someone or someone somewhere called them such, and now so it is. But what happens when the truths we are subjected to don't feel true to us at all? We are all born with a sex, but then we are provided with a gender which we are to accept as truth for much of our lives. We are provided a set of beliefs and value systems by a religion or spiritual practice that our families practice, and we are just expected to believe them. And we are taught right from wrong at a very young age before we can even learn about the gray. Now, I understand that kids need to be given some boundaries, a guide by which they can live their lives within, else they feel lost. But at the same time, who says our guide, our manual for living, our book of truth is the right one? And are we completely devaluing our children's inherent sense of their own truth by imparting what we believe to be our wisdom upon them? I don't know, this has all gotten a bit heady, but perhaps my guests can better clarify what truth means to them. I'm super excited to welcome into the Waystation today Shane Kelly, So Brown, and David Langton, three very real people with very real, very honest, very true stories about their own experiences with truth. I hope you can relate. I'm so thankful to welcome in the Waystation today So Brown, David Langton, and Shane Kelly, three really awesome storytellers that are going to share about their versions of truth, the ones that they were raised with, the ones that they accept now, and the ones that they live by now. So we're going to get started with So first, but first a little bit about So. So Brown is a musician and realtor born in Houston, Texas, currently living in Brooklyn, New York. So whenever you're ready, we'd love to hear your story.
Hi there. It's great to be here with you today. So as you mentioned, I was born in Houston, Texas. I grew up in the 80s, and from a young age, I was gender nonconforming. So in Houston, Texas at that time, that meant there wasn't nearly the amount of conversation around that topic as there is today. So for example, early on, I don't even know if it was directly spoken, but there was this sort of understanding that boys liked blue and played football, because remember it's Texas, and girls liked pink and were cheerleaders. And those were sort of the two options that were presented to me as far as what was possible as far as gender. And in my childhood world, I wanted to be everything. I wanted to shift from a boy to a girl, to a tree, to a frog, to a sky. But I was presented with these two options. And if I had to choose between these two things, well then, I liked Ninja Turtles and I liked to ride my bike and football was okay. So I guess I would choose that one. And my name growing up was Sonia. And I don't think that the message I got from Texas society was that they didn't want me to choose per se. Like I felt like those were the two available choices. And so in third grade, I cut my hair short, but it always caused a scene. So like one memory I have, for example, is going to shop for jeans with my dad in just a regular store. And so I picked out some jeans, and my dad, he was trying to force me to be more feminine and to wear women's clothes, like girls' jeans. But then the store owner would look at him being like, why are you forcing your son to wear women's clothes? And I would be like, yeah, Dad, why are you forcing me to wear? And it was a constant scene, and my dad was embarrassed and I was embarrassed. And it was just that degree, so it led to a degree of being kind of ostracized and outcast from society from a very young age, 3rd grade for sure. And we'd have like guest speakers come to our school where they'd memorize everyone's name, I guess. You're like, oh, Ryan, Megan. And they'd get to me and they just kept messing up. Like I would throw everybody's plans off just because I existed and be like, oh, Scott. And the whole class would laugh and I'd want to go crawl under a rock. So when you mentioned the topic of truth, that was the first thing that came to mind were like the possibilities that were presented as what could be true in regards to gender and where I fit into all that. And like I said, it was a constant spectacle. I didn't want to join the Girl Scouts, but the Boy Scouts wouldn't have me, so I just hung out by myself all the time. And it got exhausting. And when I was 12, my dad got transferred to Miami, Florida, and I started a new school right after Hurricane Andrew. So moved there, 5 weeks later, a hurricane destroys everything. And I was glad because I was so nervous to go to school by that time that I would take a Category 5 hurricane over 7th grade any day. And at this new school, no one knew if I was a boy or a girl, and no one could really tell if I was a boy or a girl. And frankly, I didn't know with the available information I had on life possibilities, like what I was. And so, I was starting to go through puberty at that point, which was really hard on me. And I had this denim jacket that I would wear every day to disappear. And half the classes thought I was a boy and the other half thought I was a girl. And I made sure not to let anyone get too close to me and not to have any friends. And if I had to go to the bathroom, I would try to sneak into the nurse's bathroom. And I would come home every day after school and go fishing in the canal in our backyard with my cat, who was my only friend for that year. So again, my conception of like possible truths was built on interacting with the society that I was in at the time. It was rough. So now I live in Brooklyn where there's all sorts of possibilities for gender and no one really cares. That was a big adjustment. Thinking like to go from when I moved up here about 12 years ago and to go from feeling like everybody hates me everywhere I go to just people kind of like waving like, hey, what's up, neighbor? It took years to wrap my brain around that. The most mundane things just to be kind of included in society. And I will say within that, being here, I kind of got to have a second childhood. And like I remember for a while I was teaching music to kids. And one day, one of my boy students came in with his fingernails painted, which again, up here is like I know plenty of guys that paint their fingernails up there. But growing up in the South, if I had done that, I would have got probably beat up for it and people not even know what my gender was. And there was this moment of just, this is okay now. I'm safe now. And I don't have to like bring the traumas that I grew up with into any kind of modern picture. I just have to feel the uncomfortable of it, let it go and let something new come in. And I still don't really know what gender I am. I feel like, I wish there was more place for something else, because that's what I really feel like is like a something else. There's an A and then there's a B and then there's something else, which in a healthy society, I think is an important part of the picture is, and I'm okay with that. And life goes on.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for being so vulnerable, like right out of the bat and setting the tone for this episode. Yeah, it really resonated with me when you said I wanted to be everything, because I was also like that when I was a kid. I think it's very much, I was performed for several years as an actor. And one of the main reasons was just like, well, this is a way that I can be like, do like everyone. Like I can just be in, like, I can be a tree. So that was really great to hear. And I love how you noticed that, like, how you kind of threw everyone's plan off. And I think that's what makes people so uncomfortable, right? Is like they need to have this control over like what they see and their perceptions and like this plan that they have coming in. And if there's anything that throws them off from that, it's like too uncomfortable to bear. And I really appreciate that you found that it was okay to live your truth and what it sounded like to me to be at home in that truth in Brooklyn, because nobody cares if your fingernails are painted, what gender you ascribe to. Nobody cares.
So there's definitely so much more space to just be alive, like just be alive and whatever that looks like. So yeah, I'm definitely grateful for that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'd love to open it up to David and Shane. If there was anything that stood out for you, David, if you want to go first.
So it's a pleasure meeting you. I was wondering, how does it work with when your truth is conflicting with your friends or family's truth? How does that play out for you?
Yeah, I mean, that is like such a big question in our society right now. That's probably a whole nother long episode. And, when you're a kid, when I was a kid, I wasn't very powerful. Like I wasn't, I would take on my dad in particular and fight with him about stuff, knowing that I was going to lose, like that he was the adult and I was the kid, and I probably didn't stand a chance. But that's the thing about kids is that, like, when I was a kid, I just couldn't lie. So what was I going to do? I can't lie. And, so I guess I'll fight. But that fighting kind of shaped my personality as well. So I really want there to be a way for everybody to live together in this world, and learning, if there's people that, and there's people that just are going to hate me no matter what. Like, I'm not part of the worldview, and I don't really know what to do about them. Thankfully, most of my family has come around because I've been this way forever. I've been this way since I was like 1 year old. What do you want me to do? Come on, give me a break. Take it up with God. Did God make a mistake? I don't know what to tell you. So anyway, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I got.
Yeah, that brings up another point that I was thinking about before this recording, was the truth that we place on our kids and how we just expect them to grow up with that truth. And you saying that, like, I've been like this since I was 1 year old, it's that kids are born with their own truth, and who are we to deny that of them?
Yeah,
I think there's a real lack of faith and respect for children in this country, for sure.
You can fight it, but even if you kill me, it doesn't change the truth. I don't know what to say. So we might as well learn to live and just be tolerant towards each other. But again, I'm from the South too, so I probably have a little more. It might have been a little easier if I had grown up in the North.
Yeah, totally. Shane, would love to hear from you if you have any thoughts on So's story.
I experienced Brooklyn as a liberating place also, where identity was not limiting into what box someone wanted to put me in. Really appreciate you lifting that up, and it really resonated with me personally, and Brooklyn in particular. So, really loved hearing that. I'm from the North, but the Midwest, so Michigan and Indiana. So there was not tolerance for folks who did not conform to what folks' ideas were of their gender and how it should be expressed. There was no tolerance there either. So I don't know. I don't know if it would have been any better, at least where I grew up. You know what I mean? And I know that I was limited as well. So I appreciate you sharing your story. And yeah, I loved hearing it. And thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Well, if it provides any hope, I'm from Brooklyn, and it wasn't always like this. It wasn't.
I hear
was.
that.
Yeah. So maybe we just need to spread a little bit of what's happening in Brooklyn, or what's been happening over the past, I don't know, maybe I would say since the early 2000s is when things started to shift, just kind of do it the Brooklyn way across the country.
That's when I moved to Brooklyn.
In the early 2000s?
It was 2002.
Yeah. That's definitely, I was in college when I started to see the shift, for sure. So there is hope. All right, we're going to move on now to David. Thank you again. So David Langton, designer, cartoonist, and educator, currently resides in Ardsley, New York, Westchester County. Was born in Providence, Rhode Island, and was raised in the suburbs. David, whenever you're ready, would love to hear your story.
Well, thank you. Well, I run a graphic design and branding agency during the day when I'm not teaching or cartooning. And we talk a lot about truth when we're building brands, because we talk about authenticity and being genuine to who you are. So we really try to get into who you really are and make sure that brand is a clear reflection, or work on essentially changing yourself to become who you want to be, which is a whole other part of brand building. I also kind of learned from running my own business and the wisdom of people who came before me, like designer Peg Patterson, who was one of my mentors, who said to me when I was starting out that you will be defined by what you do and by what you choose not to do. And that's been kind of a mantra for me in terms of my business, because it keeps you true. You find that there's a lot of times you're asked to do projects that just are not a good fit, or you just don't feel morally like you want to do them. And when that little alarm goes off, listen and don't do it. That's been kind of a hard reoccurring lesson. Again, you choose what you do and you choose what you do not do. This whole concept of faith also and truth reminded me of something that happened about 10 years ago in my office when we had a studio in Manhattan and we had an office manager who was in charge of our finances, and she stole $10,000 from us. And it was just horrifying. The idea that somebody could right under your nose expensing out things, including luxury sunglasses and tickets to things, and just using the company payroll and money to do that. I had a business partner at the time, and we had different reactions to it. I grew up as a Catholic in Rhode Island, which is kind of like, if you're in Rhode Island, your chances are you're Catholic. It's sometimes called the Catholic state. You're surrounded by this concept of the Catholic Church and the Catholic Church setting rules about what's right and what's wrong. And I certainly knew stealing was absolutely wrong. But I also was really big on the whole forgiveness side. Like, I was not going to throw anybody in jail or be the cause of someone's downfall, even though they stole from me. I just felt like that's not really the answer. So my business partner, on the other hand, he was really mad and angry and furious, and rightfully so. I mean, she did steal the money from us. And he felt a little guilty as well because it was mostly on his credit card, and he felt like he wasn't really watching the store, and there was a lot of things mixed up in it. But we almost broke up our partnership over this because I was so much into like, all right, we fire her and we move on. And he was like, no, she's doing jail time. And so that conflict in our office and in our partnership was kind of playing itself out. And we couldn't find a resolution because as hard as he got on it, I started to get more like, you know what? I don't want to be responsible for throwing somebody into the New York City jail system over this embezzling, but it shouldn't kill anybody. And I know what New York jails are like. So back and forth, we're like arguing, and I'm trying to figure out what the right thing to do is and how should I respond to this. And at some point, I was talking to friends and family and trying to figure out how could we resolve this issue. And I ended up letting go and letting him take the lead, which was like kind of contrary to me because I'm very control oriented. But I realized that we weren't going to get anywhere with me saying we don't do anything and him saying throw her in jail. So what I said to him was, you know how I feel about this, but we have a partnership based on our trust in each other, and I'm going to trust that you're going to do the right thing. And it completely shifted everything. From that moment on, he took charge of the investigation. We went to the police. I went with him. I said, I will support you on this. And I told you how I feel about this. And he shifted. He took charge. We went to the police. We filled out all the paperwork. We met with a detective. Our office manager was called in and she was confronted with what happened. And she actually was really sorry and upset. She did not do jail time, but she was required to pay back the money. And she did. And years later, she actually contacted us and asked for forgiveness. I mean, a lot of stuff happened in that transition. But for me, the truth of the matter was I let go of, we're not going to do anything. And I trusted him to do the process. And when he started to take over the process, instead of fighting with me, he knew how I felt and it affected the way that he acted in the system. And so I learned that I know I'm a control freak. My wife tells me that all the time. But I also know that sometimes when you let go and you let people know what you want, you can actually influence them even more by trusting them to make the right decision. And that's what I think I really learned the most about this. I don't have to worry about being the one who's not going to take control. I'm a major planner. I'm always doing this kind of stuff. I've learned through different episodes like this in my life that a lot of times when I let go is when things happen.
Yeah. I love this idea of like, how much do you need to fight for what is true to you before you let go and let people like find their way to their own truth? So it sounds like you and your partner were just at an impasse. And as soon as you were like, you know what, I know what's right for me, but I'm going to let you figure it out on your own. That's when you were able to move through it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really interesting because as So was sharing earlier on, like growing up, not being able to live your truth, it can create this combativeness in you. And I get that too. I was definitely combative because I was not the way that I was supposed to be. I didn't act the way that I was supposed to act. So you fight for it and you fight. But then at a certain point, it's like, how much do I need to fight to be true to who I am when I can just stand in it and everybody else can adjust around me or not, or they could just get out?
Well, it's true. And I've noticed like what I call these kind of revelations in my life. Like when I was first getting married, I wanted a Catholic priest to be involved. My wife was Lutheran. So we decided we would do a combination service with a Lutheran minister and a Catholic priest. And the Catholic priest was someone who had become a friend of mine, was working in the campus ministry at NYU because I was in New York at the time. And I met with him and he was so excited that we were getting married. And he said, great, I'm going to come to Minnesota with you. We're going to do this together. He said, but I have this paperwork I need you to sign. And the paperwork was that I will promise to do everything in my power to raise the kids Catholic. And I said, well, wait a minute. I am going to make a decision on how we raise our kids with my wife, and we will decide together how we're going to do it. And he said, yeah, I know, but you have to sign this paper or I can't marry you. And I was like, that's not right. I go to my fiance and I say, and she says, I don't care because I know we're making this decision together. You can sign any paper you want. It doesn't matter to me. But it really bothered me. I just said, I can't sign something like that. I don't think that's right. And I started to like really dig in. And what happened is my friend, the priest, he went and talked to the administrators in the New York diocese at the time, what the dilemma was. And he said, do you know this guy really well? And he said, yeah. He goes, you sign on his behalf. He doesn't have to sign at all. It's like, again, because at that point, I just let go and said, all right, Father Raymond, do whatever you think you need to do. I want you to be the priest. And I didn't have to sign the papers. So again, it was like, I'm giving something up, but in the end, I didn't give it. I mean, I got a deeper truth. I got to be who I am.
Shane, I'd love to hear from you anything that stood out for you or you related to in David's story.
Well, honestly, I mean, I've been really going deep on exploring this concept of restorative justice, transformative justice. And it's fascinating that just from a principled point of view, I think you settled in on, I don't want to punish this person that stole from us. It doesn't feel like the right thing. And what ended up happening was this entire process that is now documented in books, like in the academy, like out in popular culture, of finding a way to figure out how do we engage with the person that has wronged us and give them space to come to a better place, apologize, repair the harm. Like all those things happened, right? Like the harm was repaired by her paying the money back, and she eventually apologized on her own terms. And it's like that is a notion of social justice that a lot of folks that I admire are trying to move into the mainstream for America as for the United States as a whole, which I think is really, gives me hope that it just happens naturally in a situation like that.
Yeah, it probably happens more naturally than people are willing to admit or that people are conscious of. It might be part of our nature. And then we have an entire society that tells us to do it a different way.
There are indigenous societies that govern themselves that way, right? Before colonists got here, that were governed in many ways by restorative justice principles, where someone would be a criminal and they would go through the process of repairing the harm they did or atoning for it and apologizing and making it right. And then they would be welcomed back into society once they completed that process, as opposed to, no, we're just going to give you this punishment. And you're going to sit with the punishment for as long as we feel like you need to be punished, as opposed to we're going to require you to make it right as best you can.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear from you anything that stood out for you.
Yeah, I guess for me too, like in a similar way, just that shift from sort of being at odds with the situation to letting it go. It seemed like, David, you were like, okay, I'm not going to fight this anymore. And that softening kind of changed everything in a way that was helpful to all parties. Whereas you could have just dug in and been like, all right. And it wasn't like you were giving in, because you're very clear in, this is my position, but without the fight. And that was just a nice sort of softening to allow like another possibility. So that was what stuck with me.
Thank you.
Yeah. It sounds like the letting go of the need to be right as well. We can be true to ourselves, but we don't necessarily always have to be right about it or convince other people that it's the right way. So thank you, David. Thank you for sharing your story. Now we will move on to Shane. A little bit about Shane. Shane Kelly is a venture investor and entrepreneur with a focus on emerging media technology and deep technology. He has directed capital investments in over 20 films and over 20 startups through his time working in New York City and Los Angeles, where he is currently based. Shane, whenever you're ready, I'd love to hear your story.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Delighted to be here. I think for my truth, when I think about my truth in the history of my life, there has been a grappling with a truth that I identify myself and the truth that is pushed on me by others. And I should put air quotes around that truth because that is a different kind of a perception of a truth if it's not mine. And if I go back to some of my earliest experiences of school in particular, I actually started my educational journey when I was 5, I guess, 4 or 5. I was probably 5. And I went to a school called the Learning Center I don't think it's around anymore. But the idea was a cooperative. And that cooperative was actually a way for parents, teachers, and students to collaborate on what the school should be about, what the educational experience should be about, and how that would work. The way that played out, we actually were in school in a classroom with kids that were our age, that were my age, and older, because I was the youngest age group in the school. And so we had a few years older of students, and there was this open opportunity. Here's the curriculum, and we're going to give you some instruction, but we're just going to sit and partner with you as you go through and learn it. The teachers would partner with us, the parents would partner with us, the other students would partner with each other. And so what that meant is we had an opportunity to go as fast or as slow as we wanted or needed to go. So I ended up really excelling in math and moving really fast in math. And I ended up moving a lot more and less fast at the language arts at that stage. And it was a great experience for me. Like, I loved it. We had an opportunity to participate in the rulemaking. We had an opportunity to use our gifts, which I think are kind of inverses of our flaws. And it's like, how do we identify each and lean into it with that full understanding of ourselves and our identity so that we can kind of grow in our best self and really evolve? It was an amazing experience. Later, when I was 7, 8, we moved and I went to a public school in Michigan, in like a suburb of Lansing. So this was, I wouldn't say rural, it wouldn't be a typical suburb because it was not that big of a city, but the place I went to, I suddenly learned that I was in the wrong. Like, I was learning the wrong things. I was at the wrong level across the board because this is where kids at your age are and need to be. And on these things, you're kind of okay, but you're still off. And in these things, you're like way off. Like you're in first grade, you're in second grade, and you're in like 4th or 5th grade math. That's not okay. There's no way we can let you do that. That's not acceptable. And so I very quickly learned that other folks' perception of like where I was and what I should be doing was not in alignment with where I was or where I wanted to be. So it was much more, I'm not worried about what you can do. What I'm worried about is you fitting into this box, fitting into what we believe a student at your age needs to be doing. And don't stray from that, right? So was in public school for a couple of years, a couple of public schools, and then moved to a Catholic school. And in the Catholic school is still very structured and went to actually a couple different Catholic schools. But what was interesting is they would try to allow some of my identity like that was different or divergent from everyone else's experiences. So they would give us an opportunity to, oh, well, you can work ahead in these ways, or you can work on these things in a way that suits you. But what was interesting is by the time I got to high school, I saw it again. This idea that, well, not again, let me say, I saw a very different truth that was expressed that was different than my own. which was still in this idea of, okay, Shane, fit into this box, right? This is the box you should fit into. This is what we all believe. This is what we all understand to be reality. So just accept that. One of those examples is students are supposed to be at this pace and go along, this path, and like no diverging from that path, from an academic, intellectual, physical, all of those areas. Second was a worldview. So when I got to our history class, it was called, our required history class. The main one was Western civilization, was what it was called. And I said, I got to it and it didn't click for me. I was like, oh, it's Western Civ, whatever that means, that's fine. But then what I realized is that we have a world history book and our class is Western civilization. So we literally got to through chapter 4, and chapter 5 was Asia. And the teacher said, okay, this is where we skip ahead. And we're going to skip ahead to chapter 8. We have 2 chapters on Asia, and we're going to go to this next chapter on Spain, or whatever it was. And I was like, whoa, hold on. Excuse me. Is that the only chapter we're skipping? And they were like, no. Chapter 10 and 11 is about Africa. So we'll skip that one too. And I said, well, why is that? Isn't that part of world history? Like why are we skipping these chapters that are about a certain people's history or a certain region's history? They said, hey, this is just what I do. I'm just the teacher. I don't make these decisions. You're going to have to take that up with the principal. And I did. And they were like, well, it's called Western civilization. This is not world history. And I said, well, isn't this the only history class that we do that goes outside of the United States? And they said, well, yeah, we're not teaching the history of Africa and Asia. Why would we do that? And I said, well, some of us have ancestors in those places. A lot of us do. You know what I mean? And so why are you skipping that and making that not part? And they said, that's not part of the world. That's not part of our history that we're studying. And so it was this truth that they believed that centered the experience of what we call the West in Europe and the United States, and decentering other places. And so I would continuously challenge. Well, I was like, okay, we're going to study Europe now. And I was like, well, what is Europe? It's like, well, Europe is this place over here. And I was like, well, is it a continent? No, well, we think of it as a continent. But I was like, well, but this book over here says it's not a continent and it's the Eurasian continent. And they said, well, we're not studying Asia in this class, Shane. We covered this. And I was like, well, I'm just trying to understand where we're drawing this line. And the United States is a continent, no, it's a country. Well, but it's North America. But what about Mexico? We're not studying Mexico? Well, no, we're not doing that. No, but that's part of this continent. Well, no, this is not. So it was always this thing of, hey, we're studying these groups of people and not those groups of people. And my group of people, where my ancestors were from, were consistently left out. And folks that had Asian ancestry were consistently left out. And not just left out, but excluded, actively excluded. And that was something that I always challenged. And I started to bring students together to, hey, we should actually study everyone, in all histories. And the school was not having it. Like, I was on a list then, like I started getting in trouble more often. It was like, Shane's a troublemaker because he wants to change, whatever. And I was like, well, I just want to study cultures in history with some kind of equity. You know what I mean? I didn't have that language back then. And I was very often singled out as, okay, and I was already singled out because of the way that I look. I am a Black American. I identify as a Black American. And it was in high school that I started to embrace that identity more so than African American, and embracing that identity as almost an act of political expression, which is what I started to learn is how that fit together. So, where my truth was, hey, I have a mother who is Irish American and a father who's African American, and I identify as a Black man in this world. That's my truth. And other people will say, well, no, you're this, or you're that, or you're in this box, or you're in that box. And that happened a lot throughout my youth. And I eventually went to Morehouse College undergrad. And really what was amazing there was I was able to just not be identified by others by my race, because it's a historically Black school. And so I was identified in the Morehouse environment as this and this. It was my major. It was my interests. It was my other elements of my identity. It was my gifts and my flaws. It was my personality. It was who I am at core, not just the black kid in class. That is kind of a little bit of a little bit more radical ideas than we're comfortable with. And so that was interesting for me. And I had a similar experience then after Morehouse when I moved to Brooklyn, where at Morehouse I was like, a little not so conservative, still like that radical piece was kind of like there. But then in Brooklyn, it was like, there's all sorts of radical people here. There's all kinds of radical black people here. There's so much diversity. And that was one thing that was really incredible in Brooklyn, is that you had diversity within the black population, within the Brooklyn population, within the immigrant population, where you had all different colors and races of immigrants. Then you had all colors and races of Americans. And like that was really brought home for me in part because I was able to travel abroad a lot when I was in undergrad. And so that piece of like, what is America and who is America? It's Western civilization. It is white. It is wealthy. It is the center of the world. Those were ideas that I then had to challenge, and I learned to challenge over time and realized and learned how to decenter America when, for example, I went to Japan for the first time. And I thought, well, this America, center, technology, thriving, culture, da-da-da. And I went to Japan, I was like, why do they have technology that's more advanced than what we have? I can't get this stuff at home, even in New York City. And it was like, no, America's not the forefront and the be-all, end-all of everything. If we have our strengths and we have greatness in the country, in my country, in this country, and also there are other places that are great on these dimensions and like struggle in these other areas. And so I think that idea of identity of me as an individual, and then the identity of America and the history of America and the history of world civilization, world history versus Western civilization, which I have come to see as kind of even that is kind of a demeaning term, right? That Western civilization, is it not civilized, right? Was it not civilized before the colonization of America? These were ideas that I challenged and I expressed when I was a kid, but I didn't really have the language or the context for it. And as I studied abroad and I learned more and I read more as an adult, I learned how to contextualize this and how to have language for how you center different perspectives within your interpretation and view of history, of our current present day, and all of those things. So I think this idea of who are we centering and who is the other? That is something that I have always challenged and I continue to challenge. And I continue to make assertions about and guesses about and be wrong about and be right about as I go. It is this identity, the idea of whose perspective is being centered where and when, and who's being othered where and when. Is it based on gender, sexuality, race, nationality, ethnicity? What do all those mean? Who's being centered? Who's being othered? So this is all perspectives in my mind of perceptions and interpretations of our truth.
Thank you so much, Shane. I feel like I learned so much also from your story. First off, that school that you went to till you were 5 years old, or when you were 5 years old, sounds idyllic. And it really sucks that you had to move out of it. And now I'm going to get off this recording and Google cooperative schools for my daughter. However, what I really took away from it was how, as individuals, children, as people, as learners, we're never given the whole truth. And it's really up to us to go out and find the truth about other countries, other civilizations, because we are not the only civilized part of the world. I came across this in a book once. It was about boundaries, but basically how not being given enough knowledge to get through your life is a form of abuse. And the parallel that I drew between that and what you were talking about was, if we're not told the whole truth throughout our lives, then are we like in some abusive relationship with society? I don't know. It's something to think about. And it's also something to think about when a lot of people equate truth with being right. And yet truth can be subjective. And so if we all have our own truths, if the only truth that we have is the one that was given to us, and other people have truths that were given to them, and we've got all these different perceptions of the truth, and there's all of these multiple layers, then who is the container of this truth? Like, who holds it all, really? I don't know. You got me thinking, Shane. I'd love to hear from David and So. So if you want to go first, anything that stood out for you?
The first thing that stuck with me, Shane, was that I didn't have many friends as a kid, but one of the only friends I did was this guy named Richard, and he was really good in math. And they would always send him, he was 2 grades ahead. And I remember him, like, when we were in 4th grade, like, they would send him to middle school, and he was always, like, in Houston, Texas, like, that was really celebrated. And I think he went on to be, like, a major player at Google or something like that. But he was one of my only friends because, he was unique because of the math gift. And in Houston, Texas, like that, I think his gift was kind of celebrated, whereas mine was kind of ostracized, but we were both these kind of oddballs. So you made me think of him. And also, I really appreciated you bringing up the indigenous perspective before, because for me, that was the game changer with my gender stuff, because reading into how some Native societies treated Two-Spirit or other gendered people, that was like the thing I was always looking for that I never found in American society. Like, it wasn't exactly male, it wasn't exactly female, but it was an important part of the social whole. It was like, oh, that's what I wanted. I just wanted to have a place to be me and for that to be a valued part of society. So yeah, it was great to hear you, and so much good stuff.
Thanks. So David, would love to hear from you as well.
Well, I thought it was very interesting that both of you have this theme of my truth versus the truth, as Shane did it, the truth pushed upon me by others. And I think that's a very interesting thing, because we're talking about, what do I believe to be true and what do people think of me as being true? And I also really liked the fact that I think you even said this twice, I didn't have the language back then to say what I need to say now. I think that's a great acknowledgement that as we get older, we can start to grasp these concepts. I mean, you get them when you're younger, but you don't know how to articulate them. And so here is an opportunity now that we can articulate them. And it's also one of the reasons that I think it's important to have elders in your life who can articulate things and see things from a perspective that you can't see when you're younger.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to build on this notion of kind of truth as a living, breathing thing and through the lens of perception, right? The reality is that historians debate the history all the time and are always, like, some never agree, and they have different perspectives about what this thing meant or what actually happened back then. And I feel like the skill set for our kids to learn how to analyze different folks' perspectives on the truth and find their way to the closest approximation that they can most heavily rely on is a skill set that is so critical that I don't think there's a way to distill, like, here's the truth, but I do think there's a way to build a practice and a skill set of finding your way as close to the truth as possible. And there are 2 things I wanted to just lift up. One is, David, you mentioned kind of in your story and in your comment just now, the idea of not like holding your truth and being firm in your truth without having to push it or force it on someone else. And that reminded me of Brené Brown's work, where she kind of says soft front, strong back, kind of, and there's a third piece that I'm forgetting, but it's this idea that you can hold onto yourself while being open to other people having different points of view. But it doesn't mean that you should move from your truth. And her work on that piece, I think, is really powerful. The other piece I wanted to lift is from what So said about indigenous perspectives, and especially with gender and Two-Spirit folks. This is ancient wisdom, right? Like, truth that has lasted the test of time over hundreds or thousands of years is powerful truth because it's been tested and vetted. Two-Spirit folks have been on this planet and acknowledged by indigenous societies for a long time. This is a well-known thing. It's not a new thing. And there are folks that are really resurfacing this wisdom that we've tried to bury, like Nick Est, who's an indigenous scholar who really brings a new perspective to truth and to American history from an indigenous perspective, where he lifts up kind of the critical role of what we now kind of refer to in the culture as like gender nonconforming, and we have other words for it that a lot of indigenous cultures refer to as like Two-Spirit folks, right? Where folks would shift or will always be not conforming to any one or the other binary. So non-binary folks.
Yeah, it makes me question when you said that there are people now resurfacing the wisdom that we tried to bury. Like, why? I mean, I'm sure that's a whole other episode as to why it was buried, who needed to be in power and who needed to be in control. But yeah, this reverence for ancient wisdom. And another thing that I thought of when you were talking about the skill set that can be instilled in our children, which is what I heard, is that questioning authority and questioning the storytellers, the people that are passing down this quote unquote history, not just presenting it to them in textbooks and saying, this is what happened, but saying, how valid is this person telling the story?
If I can just jump in for 1 second to your earlier question, you said, why is this information being kept from us or something like that?
Why was it buried?
Why was it buried? And the United States is a young country. And from what I've read of indigenous writers, they look to this culture like as their little brother. It was like sometimes the little brother who's like making some big errors, whereas like the ancient wisdom is in basically every one of those civilizations that Shane's Michigan schools were saying we're not going to study, like Asia, Africa, indigenous, I'm sure there's a lot of people that have agendas within that. And like you said, that's a whole other episode. But yeah, for me, it was just so eye-opening to realize I am connected to something that was ancient from so many parts of the world. Like, it's not just like, oh, just one indigenous culture had two spirits. Oh, no, it's like in kind of everywhere you go, it was like considered a healthy part of the diverse ecosystem of culture. And we've lost so much diversity in regards to many things, like in this attempt in the colonized societies that we live in. But I don't want to go too far down that track. But anyway, I'll pass with that.
Well, I'll take one more step down that track, which is to say, why have we buried some of this wisdom? That there were two-spirit folks for centuries or millennia. If you think about how America was founded, there was active genocide happening when the country was founded. And when we decided who would vote and who wouldn't, if you're not going to give women the franchise to vote, and you are going to give some men the right to vote, propertied men, I guess, how do you determine if there are two-spirit people out there? How do you decide who can vote and who can't? Wouldn't that make this whole idea of preferencing some folks over others if you don't have two clear buckets?
Makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you all for sharing your stories. I feel like I've learned so much from this conversation. I would love to move on to our rapid fire questions now, have a little bit of fun. Each of you are going to have a turn at going first so that everyone is under the hot seat at some point. We're going to start the first one with David. David, what's the best meal you have ever had, either because of the food itself, the company you're with, or the experience of it?
Well, I'm big on the experience part. And so I think it's really about being in a place with the right person. And so that would be being in New Orleans with my wife. And I don't even remember what we ate. I know for dessert, it would be the beignet. The excitement of being in that city and feeling the music come alive and being with someone who's so special is really what I remember in terms of memorable meal.
That's awesome. What about you, So? Best meal you've ever had?
I'm going to go with nothing like open fire cooking with a group of friends. And for one of my friends, my friend Matt's birthday a couple of years ago, we did a big cookout, food from the farms where they had grown. And, I think they're hunters. So like some of the food that they had hunted, quailed over fire. And to me, again, getting back to this theme of closer to indigenous experiences, like to be like under the night sky, cooking food with my friends where it's just fresh and as close to the earth as possible. There's just nothing like it.
Yeah, that sounds beautiful. What about you, Shane?
I'm going to break the mold here, and I have to share two. One was traveling in Vietnam and going from a place that had, in short order, from being in the city, having pho. That's like literally like a bar that you walk through and choose everything that you want, and the ingredients just so amazingly fresh, to having a literally like a coconut cut down from a tree of someone's house. That was amazing. And then the second experience, I'd say, was in Chennai, which at the time was Madras, I think. We're still calling it that. But it was just a vegetarian meal on the rooftop in the city in southern India, where it was just like, I was like, I would never eat meat again, if I could eat vegetables like this. Like, it was just amazing. And the experience and the friends that I was with was really extraordinary. Those would be the two that I would call out.
I'm so hungry hearing all three of those. All right, so this one's for you. What's a popular opinion most people have that you don't agree with?
Probably most of them. I don't watch any TV shows. I don't know anything that's popular. It's like a trick question. I don't know what's a popular opinion that would agree with. I don't even know what the popular opinions are.
That's great. That is an answer. So what about you, Shane? Popular opinion that you don't agree with?
That people who disagree with you are crazy. And even the label of crazy is wrong to use in the first place. But I think everybody as humans just has this like inclination to be like, well, this is what's going on. This is why I appreciate the conversation that you're convening here, right? Around truth, which is most people fall into this thing where it's like, well, this is what's going on. What? These people are crazy over here. Like, what? What are they thinking of? And I'm always the one that I'm such a pain to my friends and family and people I really care about, where I'm like, yes, agree with you. And also the people on the other side, they do have a point of view. And here's what it is. And here's how it makes sense. And it's like, oh, Shane, that's not what I want to hear right now, right? Like, don't really want to know what these other folks are thinking. I just want to put them in I just want to other them right now and just not pay attention to what they have to say, right? And I think that's the thing that I most often disagree with. It's just like, whether you're left or right, or you're up or you're down, or you're here or you're there. Like, other people have their own perspective that is valid for them.
Yeah. David, what about you?
Well, I thought since I got to go last that I'd have time to think about it. I'd come up with a better answer. But I can't stand the marvelous Mrs. Maisel. She's extraordinarily popular, and I just find the show to be so phony.
And yet there's all these playbills behind you, and that show is like straight up theater.
I love theater. I love comedy. I love stand-up comedy. And I love old TV shows. And I actually love all the actors that are in that show. But I can't stand the way she basically screws around all day and then gets up on the stage and knocks it out of the park. Like, she should be bombing every single night. She's just like instantly beautiful and clever on the spot. And I just like anybody that I know that works in comedy and writing works their butts off. And I know it's a comedy, but I just can't get into it.
Yeah. It's a very different style. And if it's not your style, I get it.
I did think of another one too.
Okay. So
I feel like there's a popular belief that electric vehicles will save us from all our problems. And I have major concerns about how lithium batteries are produced in Chile and the massive destruction around them. And I feel like there's a price for electric vehicles as for everything else. And that, I feel like that one makes me really unpopular with a lot of my friends. And, maybe it is a better trade, but there's still a price. There's an environmental price to live with a vehicle that requires power.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have one more too. That'll be short.
They're all just going to stick on this question.
Piling on. There's a false choice between either you're Democrat or Republican, either you're left or right, either you're liberal or conservative, and that drives me crazy. No, it's not just one or the other. And the second one is there's either capitalism or socialism. Which one are you? There's a spectrum between the two, first of all, and second of all, no, there's other models too. And we would do well to learn all the models that are out there that would help us govern ourselves. And capitalism versus socialism is such a false choice.
It sounds like you're against all polarizing opinions and beliefs, which is totally cool with me.
Right there with you, Shane.
Well, it's about boxes, right? You said you don't like being forced into a box, and there you are. In those situations, we're constantly being forced into these two boxes. And it's always like that old idea of, well, if we bring on somebody from the right or the left to argue about something that's ridiculously stupid, there are more than two solutions. And frankly, most of the time, we don't agree with either of those two solutions. And we're stuck trying to figure out, how do you navigate that?
One of my favorite metaphors that I ever read was by this author, Martin Prechtel, and it was the left and the right are the two jaws that are eating up the world.
Ooh, so another visual.
That's powerful.
Yeah. This one is for Shane. What piece of art, book, music, movie, etc. had a profound impact on you?
One is the autobiography of Malcolm X, Alex Haley. Like, blew my mind. really helped ground me in the idea that these boxes that folks try to put you in are false, and that we are on a journey in our lifetime of education and learning and evolution. And everyone who tries to tell you like people don't change. So that's one. The second one is Emergent Strategy, which is a much more recent book, Adrienne Maree Brown. Just this idea of, can we think of some alternate systems, right? Like that one also kind of opened my mind to new ways of thinking about solutions that will work in the world and how to gather together.
Thank you. David?
Well, I would say that the art that touches me most immediately would be the musical Follies by Stephen Sondheim. I don't even know how I found out about it, but like decades ago, I started listening to it. And then I finally was able to see a production. I think I saw the first one at the Paper Mill Playhouse in New Jersey. And then I've seen every time it comes to New York, I go and see it. It just blows my mind every single time I get it. And what's interesting is someone who loves theater, it opens with the destruction of a theater. It's all about a theater being destroyed and being turned into a parking lot with one last show. And they just kind of come out and do the show. And it's kind of like that parable that when Luther was asked, what would he do if he thought tomorrow was the last day in the world? And he said, plant a tree. It has that idea of like, there's always hope. You never quite give up. And it's just, the music is just mind blowing.
Yeah. What about you, So?
That's hard because that covers a lot of ground. But one of the books that really, I don't know, devastated me the most in recent years was Barracoon by Zoranil Hurston, where she interviews Cujo Lewis, who came over on the last slave ship from Africa and landed in Mobile, Alabama in, I think, the 1850s. And they actually recently found that ship. I have family from Mobile, Alabama, too, so I felt like more of a connection to it. But they recently found the ship, the Clotilda, which they had tried to hide for many years. I've gone through this for an hour. But just that story and the connection to the people who had like a living experience over that passage or the suffering.
Yeah. Thank you. Need to make a list for our listeners. Okay, the next one is for David. What's your favorite thing about yourself?
My favorite thing about myself is being able to think on my feet. But I do like the fact that I'm constantly in my head combining things in different ways. So I will take a word from one area, combine it with an image from another area, bring it together in some crazy design or cartoon. I like the fact that I'm able to combine things and be constantly thinking of creative solutions. And I just do that all the time. I never fear running out of ideas. My concept is there enough time to get them all down. So I would say that.
I hear that.
That's what
I totally hear that. What about you? So what's your favorite thing about yourself?
I don't know if it's favorite exactly, but I'm grateful that I've been incarnated in this life where I've got to see a lot of really unusual parts of society and the world, you know, whether it's the experience of being like outcasted in the South, but also like the beauty of the Texas nature, to those parts of Alabama, to the joy of like village life in Brooklyn. So I just feel grateful that I've had an interesting life.
Yeah. Shane, what's your favorite thing about yourself?
I think it's really being able to sit with kind of empathy. So that gives me, I think, the ability to just see the other side of the story a lot of time, right? Or someone else's perspective on the truth, for example. It also gives me the ability to really delight in the joy of others and really enjoy that. Like I get joy from other people's joy. And so some of my favorite things to do are to cook for people I love. And I think part of that is the empathy that I have and being able to really be lifted up by empathy, not just so much in a negative way that we often use that word.
Oh, I have a good feeling now.
How would you answer that question?
I think that mine is somewhat along the lines of Shane's, in that I like that I am able to, and I feel like I'm able to create a safe space for people. I feel like people, and I've noticed that a lot on this show, people have been very vulnerable and open, and I like that I can be a part of that. Thanks for asking. So this question, the last one started with David. Okay, so this one goes to So. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Baby Jesus hates a liar.
Okay. All right. What about you, David? What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
I'm thinking it was like one time when, I don't even remember the situation, where my wife did something and I was with my father and I went, "Can you believe this?" And I went on and on and on about what I said. And he just kind of nodded and he said, "Yep. And you said it and you're not going to say it again."
Yeah. You got one time to do it.
Kind of like, it's okay to tell me that, but you're done with this now.
How about you, Shane? What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
I think the best advice I've gotten is like, life is the journey and not the result. Nelson Mandela said it differently, something like, the struggle is my life. You know what I mean? It's the idea of focusing on getting joy and fulfillment from the journey and not the destination. It's all about where we get to. It's all about what we acquire. It's all about what we amass and it's the process of getting there, right? It's the journey of getting there. And that was something that my mom taught me from jump that has always stuck with me of, no, it's about the journey. If you appreciate the journey, you already won, because then you're going to grow and evolve and keep going.
Great job, Mom. All right. Well, that was my last question. That was awesome. So I'm really appreciative of all of you being here and sharing so openly. I'm just really happy to have spent this time with you all. So thank you.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's great to meet everybody and catch up.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Really appreciate it, your stories. And Rebecca, you're creating this space.
Thank you, guys. What a thought-provoking conversation, and I feel like I'm still processing all of my thoughts and catching up from that talk. There was just a lot of things that were really eye-opening for me and a lot of directions that we went in that I didn't expect us to go. So just a couple of things that stood out for me, this idea of wanting to be everything and identifying that as being a truth for So that spoke about it, and how we're really put into this box because wanting to be everything is not possible, maybe, but who's to determine who we really are other than ourselves? And David, also this idea of not needing to be right and allowing other people the space to come to their own conclusions. What is true for you is not necessarily true for everyone else. So we don't need to fight so hard for other people to see it our way. And then, of course, Shane talking about how he realized that in his schooling, our world view really is a Western-centric one. We're given all of this knowledge and information and history about the US and Europe, but that ability to move beyond that and to learn more about other civilizations, ancient wisdoms, was really something that he had to take on for himself. And why is it that we are only teaching our kids one way or one small fraction of the truth? And, just this whole conversation about how today we're just now resurfacing some of the wisdom that has been buried. And that makes me really excited for our future, and also kind of ticked off about the whole burying of this ancient wisdom and indigenous societies. And it's not anything that I feel qualified to talk about more at the moment, but it is something that I definitely want to read more about and encourage you to do the same as well if you're something that you're interested in. And of course, you can always follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn at the Waystation Podcast. Instagram too. You can follow us at the Waystation Pod. That was a real smooth plug for following us on social media, but please do it. It really helps with our street cred. So I look forward to seeing you in the Waystation next time. I hope you're able to relate.